You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the screen, and the doctor just points a pen at it and says, well, there it is. That's the problem.
Right, it's very binary.
Exactly. It's clean. It's basically engineering. But what happens when the thing that's broken isn't your arm, but your actual existential reality?
Yeah, that's a whole different kind of diagnostic.
Right. Like, what if you do everything right, you follow all the rules, and the universe still answers your deepest needs with this terrifying absolute silence? Suddenly, that x-ray machine is just, completely useless.
You're just standing in the dark.
Exactly. You were standing in the dark, and you need a totally different kind of tool.
You really need a framework that can actually process the chaos of the human experience, without collapsing. And that is a remarkably rare thing to find, which is why the source material we are unpacking today is just endlessly fascinating.
Absolutely. Welcome to today's deep dive. If you've been listening to us for a while, you know we love taking apart complex systems. And today we are talking directly to you, the curious learner, because we are navigating the transcript of this wildly popular Arabic video and lecture series. It's titled Religion and Clay, or in Arabic, Deen wa Teen.
Deen wa Teen, yeah.
And this isn't just some casual conversation. It's an incredibly intricate exploration of Islamic theology, the psychology of belief, existential doubt, and, well, the brutal reality of human suffering.
And before we really get into the architecture of this specific worldview, we need to lay down a crucial disclaimer for you, the listener.
Yes, very important.
We are analysts today. We are not evangelists. Our goal here is absolutely not to endorse or debate or validate the ultimate theological truth presented in this source.
Right. We aren't asking you to adopt this belief system at all.
Not at all. We are here to examine the fascinating frameworks, the vivid analogies, and the deep philosophical arguments that the speakers in this source material use to make sense of the universe.
Because if you are going to understand how millions of people construct their reality, process their grief, and, define their morality, you really have to look at the source code they're running.
The source code. I love that. That is actually the perfect entry point. Let's look at the title itself, because Deen and Teen sets the philosophical stage for pretty much everything that follows.
Okay, let's unpack this. Deen and Teen. Religion and clay. The rhyme in Arabic is super catchy, but the metaphor behind it is really heavy. So what are we actually talking about here?
Well, it is a beautiful, deeply dualistic framework. In this context, Deen represents religion, but more specifically, it represents the constant, the immutable, the divine rules and decrees that just simply do not change.
Right, so like timeless rules.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if you were in 7th century Arabia or 21st century New York. The Deen is the absolute unchanging truth from their perspective. It's the perfect law.
And then there is the Teen.
Yes. Teen translates literally to clay, and that represents us, human beings.
Okay, so we're the clay.
Right. It represents our traditions, our volatile emotions, our cultures, our daily habits. I mean, clay is, by definition, malleable. It shifts.
It gets wet and muddy.
Yeah, it gets muddy, it dries out, it cracks. It gets molded into completely new shapes by the pressures of society or geography or time.
Reading through this, my mind actually immediately went to a tech analogy. It's sort of the classic dynamic of an operating system and hardware.
Oh, I like that.
The Deen, the religion, is this flawless, immutable operating system. It is the core code written by a master developer, totally bug-free.
Right.
But the Teen, the clay, is the hardware of human society. Yeah. And our hardware is fundamentally messy. It's glitchy, it degrades over time, it comes in wildly different shapes depending on the era. So the central tension, and really the entire thesis of our source today, is about the friction of trying to run a pristine, eternal operating system on hardware that is biologically and sociologically flawed.
That tension is exactly where the theology does its heaviest lifting. I mean, how does the perfect software handle corrupted hardware? How does the eternal interact with the temporary?
That's a huge question.
It is. And to understand that interaction, the source material starts by defining the ultimate human objective, which is the relationship with that divine developer.
And the source comes out swinging with a very bold claim right at the start. It argues that the happiest, most grounded people on earth, historically pointing to the prophets, are those who have forged the strongest, most unshakable connection to that divine presence.
Right.
But the mechanism they prescribe for building this connection, it just completely caught me off guard. It's not about building giant monuments or, preaching to thousands of people. They introduce this concept called the Khabiah.
A Khabiah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a really profound psychological concept.
Oh.
It translates roughly to a secret deed, or a hidden treasure.
A hidden treasure.
Right. And the text suggests that the most powerful way to build an intimate, indestructible relationship with God isn't through public displays of piety, where you get social credit.
Like showing off.
Exactly. It is through acts of pure goodness that literally no one else on earth knows about.
And when they say no one, they mean no one. Not your spouse, not your kids, and certainly not your social media followers. It has to be an absolute vacuum of human validation.
Precisely. And the source illustrates the weight of this with a highly poignant historical account. There is a story of a man performing Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca.
Okay.
Now, historically, and even today, parts of this journey can be physically grueling. You are exposed to the elements. So during this particular night in the story, the weather drops to a freezing cold.
Just absolute freezing.
Yeah, and the man is bundled up in his heavy, warm coverings, shivering, literally just trying to survive the night. As he walks, he passes a woman who is sleeping on the frozen ground.
Oh, wow.
Her coverings have slipped, and she is entirely exposed to the harsh wind, clearly freezing in her sleep.
Now, stop right there for a second. Let's look at the normal human response. The ethical thing, the good hardware response would be to wake her up. Say, hey, you're freezing, let me help you.
Right, of course.
Or maybe you find an organizer to get her a tent. Or, at the very least, you give her your blanket, she wakes up, sees you shivering, and says, oh my goodness, thank you so much, you saved my life.
That is the standard transactional morality. You do good, you receive gratitude, the social balance sheet is settled.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is that this man bypasses the social balance sheet entirely. Without waking her, without looking around to see if anyone is watching, he takes his own warm covering off his body.
While he's freezing.
Yes, while he's freezing. He places it carefully over her to protect her from the cold, and he just walks away into the freezing night.
That's intense.
He dedicates this act entirely, 100%, to God. He actively conceals it so that the only two entities in the universe aware of this transaction are him and his creator.
I mean, that sounds incredibly romantic, but let's be real. Humans are biologically and socially wired for validation. Evolutionary psychology tells us that altruism is often about tribal status, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
If we give up our blanket in the freezing cold, our evolutionary programming just screams at us to make sure the tribe saw it, so our status goes up, so we are protected in the future. So is this text seriously asking the hardware to run a script it wasn't built for? Isn't it nearly impossible to genuinely desire zero credit?
It is agonizingly difficult, which is exactly why the theology places such an astronomical premium on it. The text acknowledges your exact pushback. We crave the applause. We really crave that, thank you.
We really do.
But the theology argues that when you receive human gratitude, the transaction is closed. You got your payment in the form of dopamine and social standing.
The account is settled.
Right. So the Khabiah, the secret deed, is an attempt to short-circuit that human biology. By stripping away the social reward, as actually left, only the pure intention. It creates an exclusive, intimate currency between the individual and the divine. It is a private deposit into a spiritual bank account that no earthly bank manager can even see.
And the source notes that this isn't just an abstract deposit. It acts as a literal key. Because the story continues, noting that when this man faces severe, life-threatening distress much later in his life, he prays. But he doesn't just ask for help generally. He asks God for rescue specifically by the secret that is between you and me.
He cashes in the hidden currency.
Right.
But what is brilliant about this source material is that it doesn't just leave this as an ancient, unattainable ideal. The speakers in the video bring it crashing into the 21st century.
This was such a cool pivot.
They look at modern technology, the very thing that is currently amplifying our vanity and virtue signaling, and they reframe it as the ultimate tool for the Khabiah.
I found this part so compelling. They specifically bring up charity apps. Think about something like the Qatar charity app or GoFundMe or any modern digital platform. Usually we use technology to broadcast our virtues, like look at my donation badge, look at my charity run.
Look at my retweets.
Exactly. But the speakers point out that technology actually provides perfect anonymity if you choose to use it that way. You can sit on a crowded bus, take out your phone, set up a recurring monthly Visa payment to sponsor an orphan halfway across the world, and just lock your screen.
Yep.
The person sitting inches away from you has no idea. Your spouse has no idea. The technology removes all social friction. It allows you to instantly create that secret deed without having to walk through the freezing desert.
It's a fascinating blending of the ancient Deen with the modern teen. The OS finds a way to use the new hardware's features to execute its oldest, purest code.
That's exactly it. It democratizes pure altruism. But, okay, if a secret deed is a private deposit into your spiritual bank account, the text naturally has to address the other side of the equation. What happens when you try to make a withdrawal and the bank vault just won't open?
Right. What happens when you use that intimate connection, you make a desperate pleading request to the universe for help, and the universe seemingly responds with absolute agonizing silence. Or worse, a flat, undeniable no.
Yeah, that's the tough part.
This leads us directly into the source's profound exploration of supplication, or dua in Arabic. And the source does not shy away from the intense frustration of unanswered prayers. The host of the video explicitly challenges the expert on this, saying, I prayed for a specific job, I begged for it, I didn't get it, I prayed again, nothing. I even traveled to the Khabiah in Mecca, the holiest site on earth, and prayed for this specific thing, and I still didn't get it. Why is the system ignoring me?
It is the universal human grievance. Like, I follow the rules, where is my outcome? And the expert in the video responds by laying out a highly structured, three-tiered theological framework for how prayers are processed in this belief system. Here's where it gets really interesting, because it's not just a magic vending machine.
No, not at all. Let's break down those tiers because they fundamentally rewrite how a believer is supposed to process disappointment. Tier 1 is the simplest. The prayer is answered exactly as requested in this worldly life because the divine knowledge determines that the specific thing you ask for is actually good for you. You ask for the job, you get the job. It brings you peace.
Straightforward enough. But Tier 2 is where the philosophical heavy lifting begins. The text states that in Tier 2, the request is definitively denied or withheld, but it is withheld not out of neglect and not out of cruelty, but as an aggressive protective mechanism.
The theological premise here is the extreme limitation of human vision. We ask for a specific job, a specific spouse, or a sudden influx of wealth, completely assuming it will bring us happiness. We look at the immediate variable.
But we don't see the cascading variables, we don't see the fine print, basically.
Exactly. The text argues that the divine sees the unseen cascading consequences. Perhaps that specific job, which looks incredibly prestigious, would have placed you under a manager who destroys your mental health, leading to a stress-induced heart attack. Or perhaps that specific relationship would have ended in a catastrophic betrayal that ruined your capacity to trust.
Wow.
So the denial of the prayer, the agonizing no, is actually a profound form of divine mercy, actively shielding you from an unseen disaster.
I was thinking about a secular equivalent to this, and it's sort of the classic lottery curse. You look at people who win $500 million. Every single one of them prayed or wished or hoped for that money. It was their ultimate dream. And then they win it. And statistically, a massive percentage of them end up bankrupt, alienated from their families, severely depressed, or even murdered.
That's tragic.
They got exactly what they asked for, and the hardware completely melted down because it couldn't handle the voltage. The source is essentially saying that Tier 2 prayers are the OS refusing to send voltage that would fry the motherboard?
That is a highly accurate translation of the concept. The no is a firewall. But Tier 3. Tier 3 is where this theology completely reframes the entire economy of human suffering and desire.
Okay, lay it on us.
If the prayer isn't answered in Tier 1, and it isn't deflected as a protective measure in Tier 2, it moves to Tier 3. The request is delayed. It is entirely, seemingly ignored in this worldly life. But it is captured, preserved, and converted into massive spiritual currency for the afterlife.
And the imagery they use for this is staggering. The text paints a picture of Judgment Day. The source claims that on this day, individuals will be presented with incomprehensible rewards, mountains of good deeds and spiritual wealth. And the person will be confused. They'll say, wait, where'd all this come from? I wasn't this good. I didn't do all this charity.
Right.
And the response will be, these are your earthly prayers that were never answered. Every time you begged for something and received silence, it was being saved, invested, and multiplied for you for this exact moment.
The psychological comfort embedded in this theology cannot be overstated. The text says that when people see the ultimate exchange rate, when they see how astronomically valuable an unanswered worldly prayer is in the eternal afterlife, they will experience a radical paradigm shift.
A total...
The source states they will actually wish that none of their earthly prayers had ever been granted. They will look back at their worldly lives, at the jobs they didn't get, the illnesses that didn't heal, the grief they endured, and they will think, I wish I had been rejected even more. I wish I had suffered more silence because the payout here makes the earthly pain completely irrelevant.
It is the ultimate cosmic delay of gratification. Like finding out a rejected job application actually entered you into a lottery that you just won 10 years later.
Yeah.
But let me challenge this. Doesn't this framework breed a kind of fatalistic passivity?
How do you mean?
Well, if an unanswered prayer is an eternal lottery ticket, doesn't that encourage people to just accept terrible living conditions or political oppression or curable diseases because, hey, I'll get paid out in the afterlife? If the hardware accepts that suffering is profitable, why would it ever try to fix itself?
That is the exact critique leveled against many religious frameworks by secular philosophy, the opiate of the masses argument. However, the source material explicitly counters this by demanding worldly action alongside the prayer.
Okay.
The Deen requires you to seek the medicine, fight the injustice, and apply for the job. The prayer is the ultimate reliance after you have expended your physical effort. The Tier 3 mechanism isn't designed to make you complacent. It is designed to act as a psychological safety net when your maximum worldly efforts still result in failure. It prevents the failure from turning into nihilism. It gives meaning to the uncontrollable.
So it's a net for when you fall off the tightrope, not an excuse to refuse to walk the tightrope in the first place. Okay, I can see the structural logic there. It's a closed-loop system for processing grief. But this entire system, the secret deeds, the economy of prayers, relies on a transactional relationship with the divine where you are asking for favors. What happens when the dynamic flips? What happens when the communication isn't asking for a gift, but begging for forgiveness? Because the hardware is inherently glitchy. We make mistakes. We break the rules.
This brings us to a highly intense section of the text, dealing with the bureaucracy of forgiveness. And the source draws a stark, almost terrifying line between two very different types of offenses, wronging God and wronging other human beings.
Let's start with wronging God because the contrast they build is jarring. The underlying thesis here is that God's forgiveness is infinitely vast, almost eager, while human forgiveness is incredibly stingy and dangerous. They use a classic theological parable to describe how God views a sinner who finally repents. It's the story of the desert camel.
Yes. Imagine a man traveling alone through a vast, deadly, utterly barren desert. He dismounts from his camel to rest in the shade of a solitary tree. His camel is carrying literally everything he needs to survive. All of his food, and crucially, all of his water.
Right.
He dozes off, and when he wakes up, the camel is gone. It has broken loose and run away.
The sheer panic of that moment.
The text describes his absolute crushing despair. He runs to the top of a dune, looks in every direction and sees nothing but empty sand. He knows with mathematical, biological certainty that he is going to die of thirst. It is over.
Horrifying.
He resigns himself to this horrific fate, walks back to the shade of the single tree, lies down and closes his eyes, waiting for the slow death of dehydration.
He has hit the absolute rock bottom of human existence.
Precisely. But then sometime later he is jolted awake. And standing right over his head, the reins dangling, is his camel. With every drop of water and every piece of food perfectly intact.
Oh, the relief.
The man is so delirious with joy, so utterly overwhelmed by this sudden, impossible rush of life returning to him, that he looks up to the sky to thank God. But his brain completely misfires. Instead of saying, "Oh God, you are my Lord and I am your servant," he accidentally screams, "Oh God, I am your Lord and you are my servant." He scrambles the theology completely out of pure chaotic joy.
That completely inverts the Western cultural idea of a punitive, lightning bolt-throwing deity just waiting for you to slip up. It frames the divine as almost desperate for reconciliation. The source is saying that God's joy at a human being who repents and returns to him after sinning is greater than the frantic, delirious joy of that man finding his camel in the desert. It's an economy of radical mercy.
It is. And to make it even more grounded, the host in the video translates this ancient parable into a brilliant modern analogy, the traffic cop analogy.
Oh, this is my favorite part of the transcript. Okay, imagine you have been a notoriously terrible driver for a decade. You have racked up $50,000 in speeding tickets and traffic fines. You are drowning in this debt to the state. Your license is suspended. You are terrified of the law. Finally, you hit a breaking point. You walk into the police station, terrified. You walk up to the presiding officer and you say, "I'm so sorry, I messed up. I acknowledge the rules. I want to change. Please forgive me."
Now, in the real human legal system, the absolute best case scenario is that the cop says, "Great, glad you're turning your life around. Here is a 10-year payment plan for your $50,000. Or maybe, if you get a wildly generous judge, they wipe the debt to zero.
Right. Wiping the debt to zero is the absolute ceiling of human mercy. But the source argues that divine repentance operates on a completely different set of mathematics. In the divine system, you apologize to the officer, and the officer doesn't just wipe the $50,000 debt clean to zero. The officer opens a safe, takes out $50,000 in cold, hard cash, and hands it to you as a reward for apologizing.
It is an illogical level of grace.
It really is. The text references a specific theological concept where bad deeds, upon genuine transformative repentance, are not just erased. They are literally converted into good deeds on your spiritual record. The debt itself becomes the asset.
The psychological utility of this concept is profound. It establishes a structural safety net against despair. No matter how far you have fallen, no matter how corrupted the hardware has become, the door back is not only unlocked, but walking through it makes you richer than before you left. It completely destroys the argument of, I am too far gone to be saved.
Right.
However, and this is the massive chilling pivot in the text, this infinite illogical verse only applies to sins committed directly against God. Missing a prayer, failing to fast, personal spiritual failings.
Right. If you break the OS rules, the developer is very forgiving. But if the hardware starts smashing into other pieces of hardware, well, that is a completely different jurisdiction.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text issues a severe, terrifying warning about wronging people. The bureaucracy of human forgiveness is depicted as absolutely ruthless. The source explains the mechanics of Judgment Day regarding human disputes. In that ultimate courtroom, there is no worldly money. There are no dollars, euros, or gold. The only currency that holds any value is the spiritual currency of good deeds and bad deeds.
So let's walk through this practically. If I steal money from my business partner in this world, or if I maliciously slander a coworker's reputation to get a promotion, or if I physically harm someone and I die without making it right, what happens in this courtroom?
According to the text, the divine judge steps back and the victims step forward. On Judgment Day, those victims will line up. And because you cannot pay them back with the money you stole or the reputation you ruined, the court will compensate them by forcefully taking your hard-earned good deeds. The prayers you prayed in the middle of the night, the charity you gave, the fasts you kept, all of that spiritual wealth is siphoned out of your account and transferred directly into the accounts of the people you wronged.
Your spiritual bank account is literally drained by litigation.
Yes, it is cosmic litigation. And the nightmare scenario the text outlines is if you run out of good deeds. What if your debts to other humans are so vast that your good deeds hit zero, but there are still victims waiting in line?
They can't just take nothing.
Exactly. The court doesn't just dismiss them. Instead, the court starts taking their bad deeds, their sins, their lies, their mistakes, and forcefully dumping them onto your back. The source states you could arrive on Judgment Day with mountains of good deeds, looking like a spiritual billionaire, and end up completely bankrupt and loaded with other people's sins, thrown into punishment entirely because of how you treated your fellow human beings.
That is paralyzing. The speaker in the video gave a really visceral analogy for how agonizing this point-draining process feels. He talked about a university paper. He said he spent weeks agonizing over a massive research paper. It was perfect. The strict deadline to upload it to the university portal was 12 p.m. He stepped out to get a coffee, got distracted, and uploaded it at 12:30 p.m. Because he was 30 minutes late, the professor automatically docked him 5 points from his final grade.
A completely relatable feeling, the absolute agony of losing points you bled for over a minor technicality.
Right. He says he was agonizing over those 5 points for days. It ruined his week. But then he stopped and thought, you know, these are 5 points in a worldly degree that will be completely irrelevant in 100 years. Imagine the psychological torture of standing on Judgment Day, watching your eternal points, the points that literally determine whether you go to paradise, or a fire being siphoned away right in front of your eyes, given to the guy you gossiped about at the water cooler, or the employee you underpaid, or the neighbor you harassed.
It is a profound mechanism for enforcing social justice and ethical behavior. It frames every single human interaction, a passing comment, a business deal, a tweet, as having eternal, high-stakes consequences.
But let me push back on this because it feels like a psychological trap. If the stakes are this high, doesn't this framework make interacting with society an incredibly anxiety-inducing endeavor? If a misplaced word, a minor slight, or an unfulfilled debt could literally bankrupt my soul for eternity, wouldn't the most logical, safest move be to just isolate myself, to go live in a cave in the woods so I literally cannot accidentally wrong anyone?
That is the logical extreme, And historically, some ascetic traditions and monastic movements have chosen exactly that path, complete physical isolation to avoid the friction of sin. But the broader context of the Deen source material argues vehemently against isolation. The theology presented demands social engagement. You are religiously required to help the poor, visit the sick, support your family, and engage in commerce honestly. You cannot execute the OS code from a cave.
No, you are forced to play the game knowing the floor is covered in landmines.
Exactly. The tension is highly intentional. It is designed to force a state of hypervigilance in how you treat others. It demands that you actively, aggressively seek forgiveness in this world. In this world, apologies are free. You can swallow your pride, look your coworker in the eye, and say, "I was wrong, please forgive me." If they forgive you here, the cosmic lawsuit is dropped. The text is urging the listener, settle your debts here in the realm of clay, because the exchange rate in the realm of eternity will completely ruin you.
Settle out of court before you face the ultimate judge. It's incredibly heavy. But this intense, unrelenting focus on eternal consequences, on Judgment Day, on a divine court, well, it naturally begs the biggest, most foundational question of all, a question the source does not hide from. How do we even know this divine judge exists? How do we know we aren't just projecting our anxiety onto an empty sky?
Which brings us to the cosmological argument. The text directly addresses the atheistic viewpoint, specifically the modern secular consensus that the universe is a result of a random explosion, the Big Bang, and is governed purely by blind, uncaring natural laws.
And what I found so refreshing is that they don't take the anti-science route. They don't try to say the Big Bang is a lie or that physics is a conspiracy. They accept the science, but reframe the conclusion.
They utilize a deeply ingrained philosophical concept, the law of causality. The expert in the video uses a very stark, almost cinematic analogy, the bullet and the shooter. He says, imagine a man is found dead in an alleyway from a gunshot wound. The forensic detective arrives, analyzes the scene, and writes a report. The report concludes, the man was killed by the rapid expansion of gases inside a metal cylinder, which propelled a lead projectile at high velocity, penetrating his vital organs and causing massive hemorrhaging.
Which is scientifically, factually, 100% true.
Absolutely true. It describes the mechanism with perfect precision. But the source argues that the atheist looks at this mechanism, this system of physics and biology, and stops the investigation there. They look at the universe and say, the Big Bang and the laws of gravity created this, the bullet killed him, mystery solved, close the case. While the believer looks at the exact same scientific evidence, accepts the mechanism of the bullet, but asks the vital, unavoidable preceding question. Yes, the bullet killed him, but who pulled the trigger?
Who initiated the mechanism? Because a bullet doesn't fire itself.
Exactly. The text argues that the natural laws, gravity, thermodynamics, cellular biology, the expansion of the universe, are the bullets. They are the systems. But systems, by definition, require an architect. A watch requires a watchmaker. The universe operates on a highly complex mathematical code, and code inherently implies a coder.
Okay, but as soon as they bring that up, the host in the video hits back with the classic headache-inducing counterargument, the infinite regress problem. Every kid in Sunday school or Philosophy 101 asks this. Okay, if everything needs a creator and a system needs an architect and God created the universe, then who created God? And if someone created God, who created that creator? It's turtles all the way down.
It is the ultimate logical loop, and it can drive the human mind to the brink of madness. And the text reveals something deeply fascinating historically. It notes that this is not a new, modern atheist critique. Even the prophet's closest companions, the most devout foundational figures of the faith, the people who literally fought and bled for the religion, struggled with these exact same intrusive, terrifying thoughts.
Wait, really? The inner circle was doubting the existence of God?
The text notes they came to the prophet deeply distressed, practically trembling. They confessed, we have thoughts in our heads that are so terrible, so blasphemous, that we would rather be thrown into a blazing fire than speak them aloud. They were experiencing the infinite regress loop, the who created the creator whisper, and it was causing them immense psychological agony.
They felt immense guilt. They thought their hardware was fundamentally broken, that they were failing the ultimate test of faith just by having the thought pop into their heads. But the psychological twist the text provides here is incredible. It completely flips the script on how we view doubt. How does the prophet respond to their panic? Does he excommunicate them?
He doesn't punish them at all. He doesn't question their devotion. He asks them a diagnostic question. He says, do you really feel this fear? Do you feel this intense distress and resistance in your chest about these thoughts? They say, yes, absolutely. And he replies, that is clear faith. Or in Arabic, Sari al-Iman.
That is clear faith. Wait, having a blasphemous thought is proof of faith? How does that work?
The theological psychology here is brilliant. The text explains that the very fact that the mind wrestles with this doubt and the heart feels fear, revulsion, and resistance toward it is evidence of a working, living, spiritual conscience. If there was no faith in the heart, there would be no friction. The doubt wouldn't bother them. They would just accept the atheist conclusion and go about their day. The anxiety, the distress itself, is the proof of belief.
It's exactly like your body's immune system. You only get a fever when your immune system is actively fighting off an infection. The fever feels terrible, you are sweating, you are shivering, but the fever is actually biological proof that your defenses are strong and working. A dead body doesn't get a fever. The source is saying these terrifying, intrusive doubts are the spiritual fever.
A perfect analogy. The friction proves the system is online. And the advice given in the text is incredibly practical. It doesn't say, sit down with a whiteboard and try to mathematically solve the infinite regress loop, because human cognition, the clay, is inherently finite. You cannot pour the ocean into a teacup. The human brain literally cannot comprehend a reality outside of time and space, uncreated and eternal. So the advice is to recognize the thought for what it is, a whisper of Satan, a deliberate attempt to short-circuit the finite brain and to actively break the cycle. To step away from the edge of the cognitive cliff, seek refuge, and return to the tangible.
And speaking of the tangible, they ground this philosophical debate in something very modern and visual space exploration. The host in the video brings up modern astronomy looking through the James Webb Space Telescope.
Yes, the Earth versus the cosmos argument. This is where they turn the scale of the universe into a theological proof.
The standard atheist argument often uses the vastness of space to make humanity seem completely insignificant. Carl Sagan's pale blue dot. They say, look at the billions of galaxies, the trillions of stars. We are just a random, accidental speck of dust in a cold, uncaring void. To think a creator cares about what you do on the speck is arrogant, but the source inverses this entire premise. They argue that as we look at other planets, as we send rovers to Mars, as we scan Venus, as we discover thousands of exoplanets, what do we actually see?
We see absolute unrelenting hostility to life. We see planets raining glass sideways at supersonic speeds. We see violent storms of acid, barren rocks, freezing vacuums, and lethal radiation. The entire cosmos, as far as we can observe, is a death trap.
Exactly. And the source argues that the barren, violent nature of all these other discovered planets isn't proof of a random, uncaring universe. Rather, the absolute lifelessness of the cosmos is what proves that Earth is a deliberate, meticulously crafted sanctuary. The fact that the rest of the universe is a chaotic blender makes the perfectly balanced, breathable, water-rich, magnetically shielded system of Earth look completely intentional. It's not a random speck. It's a finely tuned, heavily protected terrarium placed intentionally in a hostile void.
It frames the statistical improbability of Earth not as an accident, but as the unmistakable signature of deliberate design. The contrast proves the care. However, this brings us to perhaps the most agonizing tension in any religious framework. It is the wall that breaks many people's faith, and one the source confronts directly.
Right, because if this creator is so intentional, if the Earth is this perfectly designed, meticulously coded sanctuary, how do we explain the catastrophic design flaws? If the OS is perfect, why does the Earth randomly open up and swallow people?
The problem of suffering, theodicy. Specifically, the source is asked to reconcile the concept of an infinitely merciful, loving, intentional God with the horrific, terrifying death of innocent children in natural disasters. The context of the video was recorded near the time of the devastating earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, where tens of thousands died under collapsing buildings.
This is where the theology really has to hit the pavement. It's one thing to talk about secret deeds and cosmic lotteries in a comfortable studio, but how does this framework explain a concrete ceiling collapsing on a sleeping 6-year-old? If the trigger puller is merciful, why pull that trigger?
It is the ultimate stress test for the Deen, and the expert in the source takes this on without flinching or offering empty platitudes. The foundational premise they establish first is the concept of absolute ownership. The text argues that God is the ultimate owner of all life, and humans are merely temporary tenants. We do not own our breath. Furthermore, death is an absolute, unavoidable mathematical certainty for every single human being, whether you are an atheist, a believer, a saint, or a dictator.
Right. The mortality rate is exactly 100%. Whether it's a plane crash, a slow battle with cancer at 90, or an earthquake, the exit from this earthly hardware is inevitable.
Precisely. The exit is a given, but the source introduces a psychological framework to explain our fear of this exit, our horror at the violence of death, And it is arguably the most profound concept in the entire text. It is the womb analogy.
So what does this all mean? This part blew my mind. Walk us through the womb analogy because it completely inverts how you visualize death and suffering.
Imagine you have the scientific ability to communicate with a baby, a fetus, while it is still in its mother's womb. In that specific environment, the baby has absolutely everything it needs.
Okay, sure.
It is warm, it is perfectly safe, its food and oxygen are automatically provided through the umbilical cord without any conscious effort. It floats in a state of equilibrium. It doesn't know pain, it doesn't know cold, it doesn't know hunger. To the mind of that baby, the womb is the entire universe. It is the alpha and the omega of existence.
Right. It's the ultimate comfort zone.
Now, imagine you tell that baby, listen to me carefully. In a few days, you're going to be forcibly evicted from this perfect world. The walls are going to crush in on you. You're going to be pushed through a narrow, painful passage into a place that is loud, blindingly bright, and completely chaotic.
Terrifying.
Exactly. The cord that feeds you will be severed. You'll have to violently inflate your own lungs to breathe. You will feel freezing cold air on your skin, and you will have to cry out in hunger to survive.
If the baby could understand you, it would be absolutely terrified. It would fight with everything it has to stay in the womb. Leaving the womb to the baby would feel like the violent end of its existence. It would feel exactly like death.
Exactly. To the fetus, birth is a violent, terrifying death to the only world it knows. But we, standing on the outside, in this vaster world, know the truth. We are waiting with blankets and joy. We know that leaving the womb isn't the end, it's the actual beginning. We know that the womb, as comfortable as it was, is incredibly narrow, dark, and restrictive. We know that outside that womb awaits a world of oceans, mountains, colors, literature, love, and endless possibilities that the fetus could never comprehend.
Oh, wow. So the source is arguing that our human fear of death, our terror at the end of life, is exactly the same as the fetus's fear of birth.
That is the core argument.
Yeah.
We cling desperately to this worldly life because, like the womb, it is the only environment we know. We view death as a terrifying, violent, dark end to our existence. But the text argues that we are simply terrified to leave the womb of this world, not realizing we are actually passing through a brief moment of trauma, the pangs of death, into a much vaster, infinitely better eternal existence, which, in this theology, is paradise.
That is a staggering perspective shift. It turns the grave into a birth canal. So when applied to the visceral tragedy of the earthquake, how does the expert in the video categorize the children who were crushed in the rubble?
The source treats the death of those innocent children as a rapid, merciful transit. The expert states they were extracted from the narrow, painful, and ultimately tragic world of human existence, a world where they would eventually face disease, heartbreak, and sin, and instantly transported into ultimate bliss. In Islamic theology, anyone who dies under a collapsed building is categorized as a martyr. They are martyrs of the rubble. They bypass the intense trials and the long suffering of adulthood, and their souls are immediately secured in a state of perfect grace. The womb contracted violently, but they were born into paradise.
Okay, I hear that. And I can intellectually see the deep comfort that brings regarding the victims, but I have to push back hard here because this is where the human element, the teen, really screams in pain. Even if we accept the theological premise that the child is now in a vastly superior, painless place, what about the parents?
Yeah, the survivors.
What about the mother who has to dig through jagged concrete with her bare hands, screaming for her child? What about the people who survive with missing limbs, or the millions of us who watch this horror unfold on the news? How is that not just cosmic cruelty disguised as a message? Isn't it incredibly harsh to tell a grieving mother that the earthquake was a mercy?
It is a brutal, agonizing reality for those left behind, and the source does not minimize their tears or their psychological destruction. Instead, it explains the dual-purpose nature of such cataclysmic tragedies. The event means something different depending on where you were standing. For the victim, the child, it is an end to worldly tests and an immediate entry into mercy. But for the survivor, the parent, and the global audience witnessing it through their screens, the tragedy serves a completely different, terrifying function.
Which is what?
The survivor's burden. The text frames the sudden, terrifying, random nature of the earthquake as the ultimate, inescapable wake-up call. It is the violent disruption of human complacency. We go through our daily lives assuming we have decades left. We hold petty grudges, we skip our prayers, we prioritize climbing the corporate ladder, we ignore the poor, all under the arrogant assumption that we will fix our spiritual lives tomorrow. The earthquake shatters the illusion of tomorrow. It proves that the ground beneath your feet is not guaranteed.
It forces the survivor to confront their own mortality instantly.
Yes. The source argues that witnessing such random, unavoidable destruction is a severe divine intervention meant to force you, the survivor, to reevaluate your life. If the building had collapsed on you, would you be ready for the courtroom? The tragedy is designed to make you settle your debts, forgive your enemies, and reconcile with the divine before your own unavoidable exit arrives. The grief is the price of the awakening.
So, the victims get peace, and the survivors get a terrifying, necessary alarm clock. That is a heavy, heavy framework to live within. It doesn't make the pain go away, but it provides a structural meaning to chaos. It ensures that pain is never viewed as merely absurd, random, or useless.
Exactly. Constructs a reality where even the darkest moments are integrated into a purposeful design.
But here is the practical problem I see with this. If natural disasters, death, and cataclysms are these loud, terrifying wake-up calls meant to keep us spiritually alert, how does a person stay awake in their normal, boring daily life? We can't live in a constant state of earthquake-level adrenaline. We are clay. We forget.
Right, the clay settles.
The hardware gets comfortable again. 2 months after the tragedy, we are back to arguing about traffic and ignoring our souls. Without needing a tragedy every single week to scare us straight, how does the source suggest keeping this connection alive? Does the text offer a survival strategy for the hardware?
It does, and that brings us to the crucial concept of daily and yearly anchors, the rituals. The source recognizes that human beings have terrible spiritual amnesia. Therefore, it prescribes built-in maintenance routines for the human hardware to ensure it stays constantly connected to the divine software without needing a disaster. It specifically points to 2 foundational practices, the fasting month of Ramadan and the 5 daily prayers.
And the way the source frames these rituals is incredibly pragmatic. They don't just talk about them as floaty, mystical concepts where you sit on a mountain. They talk about them in terms of raw return on investment. Let's look at Ramadan. The host in the video uses an analogy that I think anyone grinding away in the modern corporate world will instantly, viscerally understand.
Oh, the 20x salary analogy is brilliant.
The host says, imagine you are working a grueling 9-to-5 job. You are tired, you are underpaid. One day, the CEO calls you into his office and says, listen, for the entire month of March, we are running a special, unprecedented promotion. Every single hour you work, every project you complete, I'm going to multiply your standard salary by 20. If you usually make $5,000 a month this March, you will make $100,000 for the exact same amount of work.
A completely life-changing opportunity. Generational wealth in 30 days.
Now, what kind of person, knowing this promotion is happening, would say, you know what? March sounds like a great time to take a month off. I'm going to go to the beach, ignore the emails, and not work.
You would call them a fool. You would say they are actively, aggressively sabotaging their own future.
The source views the month of Ramadan exactly like this cosmic multiplier. It is a 30-day window where the spiritual payout for every good deed, every prayer, every dollar of charity is multiplied exponentially by the divine CEO. The host shares an anecdote about walking down the street and seeing a young, perfectly healthy person casually drinking water in public during the day in Ramadan, actively choosing not to fast.
Wow.
And the host isn't just angry at them for breaking a religious rule, he's genuinely baffled and profoundly sorrowful for them. He views it as a tragic act of self-sabotage. That person is walking away from the 20x multiplier. They're leaving millions of eternal dollars on the table for a sip of water.
It shifts the entire perspective of religious duty.
Yeah.
It moves it from a heavy burden or restriction to a limited time offer. Fasting isn't starvation, it's an investment strategy. But Ramadan is only once a year.
Yeah.
That brings us to the daily maintenance. And this raises an important question regarding the 5 daily prayers. Because in the modern hypercapitalist world, stopping what you are doing 5 times a day feels incredibly, almost offensively disruptive.
Disruptive is putting it mildly. In a culture obsessed with productivity, inbox zero, and hustle culture, stepping away from your desk, logging off your phone, washing your face, and physically prostrating on the ground 5 times a day seems like a massive inefficiency. The hardware is trying to work.
But the source completely flips that concept of disruption on its head. It argues that your worldly life is the disruption and the prayer is the reality. It frames the daily prayer not just as a religious duty, but as an absolute non-negotiable psychological necessity. It is a deliberate, mandatory severing of worldly ties.
Like a forced hard reset for your brain.
Precisely. The text compares the psychological act of prayer to a profound shift in hierarchy and authority. Imagine you are a low-level security guard at a massive corporate facility. You are tired, you are bored, you are leaning against a wall, checking your phone, stressing about your electric bill.
Standard Tuesday.
Right. Suddenly, the head of state, the king or the president, walks right past your post. Instantly, your posture changes. You stand at attention, your spine straightens, you're putting the phone away, you are fully present. You feel a sense of awe and duty.
Because you are suddenly in the direct presence of ultimate worldly authority. Your electric bill doesn't matter in that exact second.
Exactly. The source argues that prayer is stepping onto a prayer mat in the quiet of the night or in the middle of a chaotic workday and standing proudly at attention, not for a human king who will eventually die, but for the eternal creator of the universe. It is an intentional, physical act of elevating oneself above the mundane stresses of the day. It shrinks your worldly problems by actively placing you in front of the ultimate power.
It's forced perspective. If you remind yourself physically and verbally 5 times a day that you are speaking directly to the architect of the cosmos, the fact that your boss sent you a passive-aggressive email suddenly doesn't feel like the end of the world. It rescales your anxiety.
That is the intended psychological relief of the OS. But what happens when that relief stops working? What happens when a person ignores the maintenance routine, misses that prayer, and feels absolutely nothing?
This is where the source provides a diagnostic tool that I found genuinely chilling. It's not a theological quiz, it's an emotional diagnostic. It's called the dead heart test.
It is a stark, terrifying warning. How do you know if your soul, your spiritual core, is in critical condition? The source asks the listener a simple question. When you miss a mandatory prayer or when you commit a sin you know is wrong, do you feel pain? Do you feel guilt, anxiety, a heavy sense of loss in your chest?
And the natural human instinct in the 21st century is to hate guilt. We view guilt as toxic. We go to therapy to stop feeling guilty. We take pills to stop feeling anxious. We want to feel okay and validated all the time.
But the text argues that in the spiritual realm, pain is the ultimate proof of life, just like physical pain neuropathy. If you put your hand on a burning hot stove, the intense pain tells you to pull your hand away, preventing severe, permanent tissue damage. Spiritual guilt operates the exact same way. It tells you that your soul is touching the stove. If you miss a prayer and you feel that terrible ache of guilt, the source says, rejoice. Your heart is still alive. The spiritual immune system is working.
That's the alternative.
The alternative is the ultimate catastrophe. If you miss the prayer, ignore the divine connection, lie, cheat, and you feel absolutely nothing. If you're perfectly happy, content, and unbothered while completely disconnected from the source, the text says that is not peace. That is necrosis. The heart is dead, the nerve endings have burned away, the spiritual alarm system has completely failed, and the house is burning down while you sleep peacefully in the bedroom.
That is such a visceral way to frame morality. The numbness is the true enemy, not the pain. But keeping that sensitivity alive, keeping the heart beating and feeling the guilt is incredibly difficult to do in isolation. If you are the only one trying to run this OS and everyone else is running completely different software, the friction is enormous. Which brings us to the final major theme of the source material, the environment, the people you surround yourself with, and the inescapable gravity of your social circle.
The text places an immense, almost uncompromising emphasis on the physical and social environment. It argues that your peers act like a literal gravitational pull on your spiritual life. You simply cannot sustain a high spiritual frequency if you are constantly, voluntarily immersed in low-frequency inputs.
They tell this really humorous but deeply profound story in the video to illustrate this point. It's the story of the guy at the mosque.
Ah, yes. The inescapable power of social friction.
So, there's a guy who absolutely refuses to pray. He has zero interest in religion. He likes his life exactly as it is. But his friends are devout, and they are going to the mosque for the evening prayer. They invite him just to hang out. They promise him, listen, you don't have to pray. Just come sit with us, enjoy the air conditioning. We won't bother you about it. Just wait for us. So he goes. He's sitting in the back of the mosque, leaning against the wall, totally comfortable in his decision not to participate.
The environment is neutral for him at this point. He's an observer.
Right. But then the call to prayer happens. The ikmah is called, and the congregation stands up. Every single person around him, his friends, the strangers, the old men, the young kids, they all stand up in unison and form perfectly straight lines, shoulder to shoulder, to pray. And suddenly, this guy is the only human being sitting down in a room of hundreds of standing people.
The social dynamics shift instantly.
Yeah.
The gravity turns on.
Exactly. The host says the social friction of remaining seated becomes agonizingly high. It suddenly takes drastically more energy, more stubbornness, and more willpower to sit there and be the odd one out, the anomaly, than it does to just join in. So what does he do? The gravity of the environment pulls him up. He sighs, gets up, goes to the washroom, performs the ablutions, and joins the line. He prays. And the kicker of the story is, by the time the next prayer rolls around a few hours later, the friction has completely disappeared. He actually wants to do it.
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of behavioral change and how ancient theology perfectly mirrors modern psychology. Modern behavioral science tells us that willpower is a finite, easily depleted resource. If you rely solely on your own internal willpower to do something difficult, like establishing a new moral habit, quitting an addiction, or maintaining discipline, you will eventually exhaust yourself and fail.
You just run out of steam.
Right. But if you change your environment, if you surround yourself with people who normalize the exact behavior you want to adopt, the friction is drastically lowered. The text is applying this universally accepted psychological principle to theology. The friction to do good is nearly zero when you are immersed in a community that is collectively doing good. You are carried by the current.
The environment does the heavy lifting for the hardware. But the text doesn't stop there. It takes this concept of environment and turns it completely outward, connecting it back to the very title of the source, Deen and Teen, religion and clay.
Yes, the heavy burden of representation. This is where the source directly addresses the modern, globalized believer.
Right. The speakers note a very common modern phenomenon. When people travel abroad, when they leave their home country, their family, their local mosque, they are suddenly completely free from that gravitational pull we just talked about. They are in a new environment, say on vacation in Europe or studying abroad, and very often because the social friction of their home community is gone, they shed their religious morals. They might drink, skip prayers, or engage in behaviors they would never dream of doing back home.
And the psychological justification these travelers often use is compartmentalization. They say, I am just an individual on vacation. I'm not a scholar. I am not a priest. I do not represent the religion. I'm just a guy living my life and blowing off steam.
But the source fiercely, aggressively pushes back on this excuse. It refuses to let them compartmentalize.
It dismantles it completely. The text argues that in the eyes of the outside world, the philosophical distinction between the Deen, the pure, abstract, perfect religion, and the Teen, the flawed human acting it out, simply does not exist. Onlookers do not separate the software from the hardware. Whether you want the responsibility or not, the moment you are identified by your name, your appearance, or your origin as a member of that faith, you immediately become the avatar of that faith.
You are the walking billboard.
Exactly. The host in the video uses the analogy of a brand. You are wearing the uniform. The text states that the vast majority of onlookers will never read the theological text to understand the religion. They'll only read you. Your clay, your actions, your honesty in a business deal, your manners with a waiter, your indiscretions while on vacation is exactly how others will judge the pristine religion.
If your clay is dirty, they assume the religion is dirty. If your hardware is glitching, they assume the operating system itself is a virus.
It is an immense, inescapable burden of representation. It means that personal morality is never truly private. It is always, inevitably, a public testimony of the faith itself. You are either attracting people to the truth of the system, or you are actively repelling them from it, based entirely on how you conduct yourself in the mundane moments of life.
And that brings us full circle, right back to the beginning of this incredibly deep dive. We've traversed a massive, complex landscape today. We started with the concept of the Khabiah, the secret deeds, exploring the radical idea that the most valuable actions are the ones intentionally hidden from the dopamine loop of society. We explored the complex, cosmic economy of unanswered prayers, where rejection and silence in this world are actually high-yield, protective investments for the next.
We waded through the terrifying bureaucracy of forgiveness, contrasting the infinite illogical mercy of the divine with the unforgiving, litigious nature of human grudges, where your eternal currency can be drained by the people you wronged. We examined the cosmological argument, looking at the bullet and the shooter, and viewing the perfectly balanced Earth not as a statistical accident, but as a deliberate sanctuary amidst a violently hostile cosmos.
We tackled the heaviest topic of all, the problem of suffering. We looked at the profound womb analogy, reframing the terrifying end of earthly life as a birth into a vaster existence, and understanding global tragedy as the ultimate, necessary wake-up call for the surviving hardware. We discussed the daily and yearly anchors that keep us grounded, the 20x multiplier of Ramadan, and the daily severing of worldly ties through the forced perspective of prayer, guarding against the terrifying, painless necrosis of the dead heart.
And finally, we look at the inescapable gravity of our social environment and the heavy public burden that our flawed human clay bears in representing the eternal religion to a constantly watching world.
It is a remarkably robust, interconnected framework for understanding existence. It is an OS designed to handle every single glitch the hardware can throw at it.
And this is exactly why it is so crucial to engage with these texts, regardless of your personal theological background. Even if you, the listener, view everything we discussed today entirely through a secular, psychological, or sociological lens, the tools presented here are profoundly useful.
How so? Give us the secular takeaway.
Think about it functionally. The pursuit of quiet, unacknowledged altruism, doing good without seeking any external validation, is an incredibly powerful antidote to the narcissism and anxiety of the social media age. The ability to reframe rejection, failure, and unanswered desires as protective firewalls or delayed benefits builds immense psychological resilience. Understanding that your social environment dictates your habits can radically improve your life trajectory. These are psychological frameworks that offer profound ways to navigate the chaos, anxiety, and moral ambiguity of the modern world, whether you believe in the divine courtroom or not.
The software might be ancient, but the bug fixes for the human hardware are incredibly relevant today. Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought. We've talked a lot about visibility today. The heavy burden of representing a faith to others, the danger of virtue signaling, the biological desire for applause and status.
The eternal tension between the public self and the private truth.
Exactly. So I want you, the listener, to really mull this over as you go about the rest of your day. In an era where every single moment of our lives is documented, broadcasted, curated, and monetized for public approval, what if the most valuable, defining, and truly eternal thing you will ever do in your entire life is something that literally no one else will ever know about?